Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
There's a thread running through all the stories we've been talking about today, from fake news to fear-mongering to hyperpartisanship and attacks against journalists. Think about what this week was. This was the week President Trump called Stormy Daniels horseface and then praised the body slamming of a journalist in Montana, and there were huge cheers for it. There's a lot to get through here, and I want to bring in the one man who can help us do it, Carl Bernstein. Carl, you've been saying to me this is the war on truth. We are seeing a war on truth. And is President Trump winning that war?
It's not just President Trump who's winning that war. It's the forces of those who believe in untruth. And paramount among those forces is Donald Trump and the way he looks at the world. Look, we have had presidents in the past who have lied. There's no question about that. But what we have never had is a president of the United States who uses lying and untruth as a basic method to promote his policies, his beliefs, and his way of approaching the American people and engaging with the world. That his default position is to use untruth to go toward his objectives. And the best example of it in this horrible week in which we are dealing with the Khashoggi murder is the body slamming incident where the President of the United States, again repeating that the press is the enemy of the people, this horrible phrase with its echoes of totalitarianism, gets up and praises a congressional candidate for body slamming a reporter in the same time period in which a reporter has been murdered, perhaps dismembered, by an outlaw rogue state actor. So where does that put us? On what side of the equation?
You tell me, where does it put us?
I think where it puts us, first of all, is that uniquely we have a president who does not believe in truth as the force that ought to be our objective in policy and who we are as a people. This is far different than anything we have experienced, but it also is part of, Trump didn't invent this, and we live in a time in which truth is devalued in all kinds of institutions. And we have now this division, not just among our people, but through social media, through the press. But I want to suggest that particularly news institutions, and particularly on television, cable news, that we need to be doing much more than just Trump lie catching. The lie catching is easy, but when Trump talks, for instance, about voter fraud, as he did in a tweet last night and warned people against fraudulent voting, we need to be doing stories about the reality of whether or not there is widespread voter fraud. Let's look at the underlying questions as reporters and present real reporting in depth that examines the underlying issues.
And there is not. There is not widespread voter fraud. I think most Americans know that, and all the reporting backs up that. And yet, the president, by tweeting it, what's he doing, Carl? Is he engaging in a form of voter suppression?
It certainly would appear that is part of it. Also, I talked to people in the White House or in touch with the White House on Friday who believe that if the congressional midterms are very close and the Democrats were to win by 5 or 7 seats, that Trump is already talking about how to throw legal challenges into the courts, sow confusion, declare a victory, actually, and say that the election has been illegitimate.
It is Tuesday, the 23rd of October of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. That's right. I got to tell you, the Spanish smoked hot paprika is really lovely. If you want to use that instead of the Hungarian, go right ahead. Please. I just happen to have the Hungarian in my cupboard, and that's what I usually get. But I got to tell you, the Spanish is fabulous. And if you want a substitute for pumpkin spice, there is no substitute for pumpkin spice. You don't ever use it. Okay, please. Oh, my God. But I will tout the medicinal impact of cumin. If you can get a good curry blend going, you can just a little smidgen of that. Put that in a pie. Just a little bit. You're going to get some sweet in there, too. But try that sometime. Instead of the pumpkin spice, please. Ugh. I keep telling you, pumpkin spice is Russian active measures. And that's how you can tell how long it's been going on. Speaking of Russian active measures, Trump admitted to being a Nazi last night in Texas. I am a nationalist. My advisors, my staff tell me not to ever say that word. It's a bad word. But I'm a nationalist. He has my struggle right on his bedstand. So of course he's going to be a Nazi. Jesus. On the other hand, I'm not a Trappist monk, and I used to have 7-story mountain on my bedstand. So, I'm just saying. To each his own, apparently. But with this guy... oh, boy. Talk about the big lie. Well, a bunch of small lies make up a big lie, too, apparently. You get numb to them all. And he's pulling out all the stops. But I have a suspicion that there are a lot more critical thinkers out there than are being polled, and they vote. And if they can keep people from voting, which they're pulling out all the stops for that, Jesus. Okay, and then we have to defend against the legal challenges, because this election, if the Democrats prevail as we suspect, it's not a given. Remember, Hillary was up 2 weeks, or after 2 debates under her belt, 2 debate wins under her belt, she was up 50-38, and that was 5 days before the Comey letter. So I'm just saying, which, on ancillary to that is that she was a bad candidate. She was up 50-38 5 days before the Comey letter. The only given is that this guy is going to say that this election is illegitimate, and probably the Democrats had Russian help. Well, it's a wag the dog. There actually reportage of this latest strategy is almost page by page from Wag the Dog. Maybe. I think it might be from the, what's that French novel from back in the 70s? The Parade of Angels, I think is what it was. This is the one the right wing is taking to heart now. It's like an updated Turner Diaries, where a bunch of brown people, this story is like a bunch of brown people from India come in the millions and then just overrun all of white Europe, and it was a genocide of the whites. The whites got genocided by all these brown people just running over the continent, and you can't have that. It's not immigration, it's an invasion. Where have we heard that before? So we got that going on. Fear-mongering the immigrant, fear-mongering the foreigner, kicking the press. It's just on and on. And he said he's a Nazi. And people cheered. Well, it was a certain demographic of Texan. Okay? I wouldn't say that it's all of Texas, because I know a lot of Texans who hate fascists. With a passion. So I guess they've worked the refs, so now anybody who would be anti-fascist is Antifa. Okay, so we know where we stand. We have a couple of weeks left now, 14 days, I believe it is, and it's counting down. I got my ballot. I like to hold mine just a little bit, but voting early is important. If you can vote early, do, because if there was a mistake on your ballot, you got enough time to correct it. And you know, if you're of a certain demographic that has been identified by, I don't know, a 400-pound guy in Macedonia, you know, they're going to find a mistake. They will, especially if someone's being paid to find it. And it gives you enough time to correct that mistake, so do. But I like to hold mine just a little bit. And I don't know. I also am of the generation where going to the polls on a particular day was almost a religious rite. It was a time I would get a little bit better dressed up, because that's what we used to do when we were a family and growing up. You know, we got a little bit dressed up, and Mom and Dad went to vote. I always liked that. Well, what's on the rest of the menu here? And the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, of course, that was Carl Bernstein at the top, describing how Trump uses lies and untruths while promoting violence against the press to promote himself and his issues. Okay, the policies are coming out, and it's like no one before him. Not like Huey Long, not like even Nixon. I mean, Nixon was an intellectual compared to this guy. Jeez. I guess those Wharton business degrees don't really mean much now, do they? Especially if you're a legacy. On the rest of the menu, Rick Scott's administration lied about a state official's role in the deadly Florida International University bridge collapse. Remember that? A pedestrian bridge collapsed, and and there was some reportage that there was some people inside the state that knew and tried to warn them, like with their hair on fire, and no one would listen to them because money was involved. Speaking of money being involved, the Los Angeles Dodgers are the second group of Major League Baseball scabs to ignore thousands of striking hotel workers and cross picket lines in Boston this season. Come on, LA, you're the Major League team. You're the National League team. The pitchers come up to bat. I root for the National League team. You're forcing me to root for Boston. Damn you. Damn you. And a 14-year-long oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico is on the verge of becoming one of the worst in U.S. history. Yeah, you know, and it's not just one well either. It's scary. Oh my. Well, after the break, we move to the chef's table where the GOP's all-out bigotry against Muslims is blowing up in its face. And it may be that the all-out bigotry among all brown and black peoples is going to blow up in its face. Even if they try to knock 1 million people off the rolls, just mostly black people, off the rolls in Georgia alone. Well, we're going to overcome those numbers as well. So there. And a New Hampshire judge bars the state's new proof of residency requirement for new voters. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com. There are links there in which you can register to vote and also determine if you are registered to vote. I keep harping on this at the top of every show, but this is the time that I blocked out to be able to do that. So it's so very, very important. Don't leave it for any surprises, okay? Know the answer before you ask the question. That's key also, all right? So go and vote and go to our homepage and make sure that your friends, sit down with them. Make sure that they're registered to vote and get them to vote. If you're registered to vote and you're ready to do it, get some others to do it too. Okay, go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. The chat room link is there on the right of the page. You can talk about registering people to vote. That's a good place to do it. Kelly Lincoln monitors that platform, and quite admirably. Do check out her shows on Saturdays at the Table with Kelly Lincoln, 3 p.m. on the West Coast, 6 p.m. on the East. And then later on in the night, she teams up with Ricky from Canada. And they command the Round Table Roundhouse Power Hour for an hour, beginning at 9 p.m. on the West Coast, midnight on the East Coast. So do that. All right, then look to the leftish of the homepage there at the bottom from the chat room link at netrootsradio.com is the contribute button, and do become a Patreon of Netroots Radio. This is the serious part. I may joke around about it a bit, but truly your generosity keeps the lights on here. But we really do need your help. I know it's tough because it's election season and monies have to go to candidates. But when some frees up, it would be nice. I always tell people, what we do here at Resistance Radio is not free, but it's cheap. Okay, and you can take that the way you want. Okay, so you can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Follow us on Facebook, of course, and follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. The show notes and links diary is posted on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and I try to get those announcements out fairly quickly thereafter. And also, you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. We're on Facebook and a few of those other social media sites too. And if you are unable to catch this live part of the show, you can always get the podcast by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Yeah, go to iTunes too. That's a good registry. But you can find the show mostly anywhere fine podcasts can be found. Mixed in with all the not fine ones too, and that's where we might be. I know. We're working on it, all right? Okay, this first article in Florida, and Rick Scott running for U.S. Senate, leaving his governorship to a white nationalist Nazi, like a mini Trump. Boy, did he look nervous in that debate. Gillum looked, well, you heard him yesterday in their closing remarks that I had here at the top of the show. And, Wow. Gillum is good. But if you had seen them, no one told DeSantis that there was going to be a split screen. Maybe he doesn't know what that means, but I guess that just goes to show that some of these white nationalists aren't really quite as prepared over time as the Federalist Society and Cato Institute and a few others have been grooming, their conservatives to take over. They're a little more polished in front of the camera, I must say. So, well, this first article is out of Alternate by Matthew Chapman. After March's tragic collapse of a pedestrian bridge at Florida International University that killed 6 people and injured 9 others, and subsequent federal fines of contractors over serious safety violations, Governor Rick Scott's administration was quick to absolve itself of blame. What is it about the right wing, or is this human nature? Is this a both-sidism? People quickly just, absolve themselves of blame and pass it off to somebody else. They pass the buck off to somebody else. No. Well, according to the governor's office, the Florida Department of Transportation played no role in approving the bridge other than issuing traffic permits, and furthermore, the engineer who could have inspected the bridge was out of the office at the time the contractors left him a message about the giant cracks that were forming in the structure. The building inspector just was out of the office, and he couldn't get back to anybody until the bridge collapsed. The story in and of itself would suggest a failure of communication at the Department of Transportation, but according to the Miami Herald, the whole story might be a lie. Wow. Bridges, Republican governors, what could go wrong? In fact, the Florida Department of Transportation engineer Thomas Andrus was present in the office on March 15th, according to a copy of his calendar obtained by the Miami Herald through a public records request and first reported by television station NBC6. And nearly 2 years before the collapse, that same engineer expressed concerns in writing to the bridge's design build team that its design left it vulnerable to cracking. Andrus's deep familiarity with the plan suggests that the state played a far more significant role than it has so far acknowledged. Interesting. Scott's communication director immediately pushed back, blasting the Herald for, quote, picking apart the timing of a voicemail left on an employee's landline that communicated no life safety issues. Giant cracks forming in a bridge. No one had died yet, so it wasn't really life-threatening. Well, life-threatening means it could threaten to kill you, not threaten to have killed you. Then it's no longer a threat. It's an actual act. Well, the Department of Transportation is still blocking the release of public records, including those of a meeting to discuss cracks in the bridge. The bridge disaster is not the first that Scott's critics say stem from failures of his leadership. Some observers say Florida's outbreak of red tide, that algae bloom that's killing fish and damaging beaches, had been exacerbated by Scott's $700 million in cuts to water management districts and failure to control fertilizer runoff in Lake Okeechobee. Pike of Think Progress brings us this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. With their own fights with management looming, Major League Baseball Players Union members let an opportunity for labor solidarity bounce under their gloves when the Los Angeles Dodgers crossed a picket line at a Boston hotel ahead of their World Series matchup with the Boston Red Sox. Thousands of housekeeping, culinary, and hospitality staff at 7 Marriott-owned hotels in Boston have been on strike since the beginning of October as part of a multi-city effort to force company negotiators to shrink the massive gulf in quality of life between their workers and their clients. Similar strikes in Chicago have already brought a successful end to hoteliers' nasty habit of cutting seasonally unnecessary staff off their health insurance during the winter months when they're surplus to service requirements. Oh, nice. That's a nice accounting way of putting it. You're just unnecessary staff surplus to service requirements demand that you don't get health care during the winter. But the Boston strikes are entering a fourth week as the full pomp and circumstances of MLB's biggest showcase arrives. The witless move from L.A. typifies, well, that can be put in any context, please. I've lived there. Typifies a contrast between baseball and other major professional sports in the U.S., particularly the NBA and the NFL. I think that part of the excuse that maybe management of the Dodgers will say is that, they signed a contract and there's an opt-out fee, and we can't really afford to pay that, sure. But it's the players that could set their foot down, and they don't have to stay at a Marriott. Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is an article out of the Washington Post by way of the Oregonian. An oil spill that has been quietly leaking millions of barrels into the Gulf of Mexico has gone unplugged for so long that it now verges on becoming one of the worst offshore disasters in U.S. history. I always hate the term oil spill. This is more like a blowout again, okay? These people don't know their oil field terms. Between 300 and 700 barrels of oil per day have been spewing from a site 12 miles off the Louisiana coast since 2004, when an oil production platform owned by Taylor Energy sank in a mudslide triggered by Hurricane Ivan. Many of the wells have not been capped, and federal officials estimate that the blowout could continue through this century with no fix in sight, thereby making the Taylor offshore blowout will threaten to overtake British Petroleum's Deepwater Horizon disaster as the largest ever. Wow, what an award that will come with it. Maybe people just want to get their lives back. 15 years of As the oil continues to spoil the Gulf, the Trump administration is proposing the largest expansion of leases for the oil and gas industry, with the potential to open nearly the entire outer continental shelf to offshore drilling. That includes the Atlantic coast, where drilling hasn't happened in more than a century and where hurricanes hit with double the regularity of the Gulf. What could go wrong? Okay, well, that Taylor Energy blowout, they call it a spill, is largely unknown outside Louisiana because of the company's effort to keep it secret in hopes of protecting its reputation and proprietary information about its operations. Well, a lawsuit that eventually forced the company to reveal its cleanup plan showed that the spill was hidden for 6 years before environmental watchdog groups stumbled on oil slicks while monitoring the Deepwater Horizon disaster a few miles north of the Taylor site in 2010. So 6 years. Well, the company sued the Interior Department in federal court, seeking the return of about $450 million left in a trust it established with the government to fund its work to recover part of the wreckage and locate wells buried under 100 feet of muck. They drill it, they break it, they don't fix it, and then they want everybody else to pay for it. Where have I heard that model before? All right, we better get to our break. We're a little over, but that's okay. We'll come back and go through weather from around the world and finish up the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Annie Sneed. When humans take the drug MDMA, best known as ecstasy, they feel a deeper connection to others, emotionally and physically, because MDMA affects serotonin, a nervous system chemical.
Serotonin is, one of the oldest neurotransmitters.
Gul Dolan, an assistant professor of neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University, who studies social behaviors.
It's been implicated in all kinds of functions, lots of them having nothing to do with social. And so we wanted to know, well, how long ago was serotonin's function, really about encoding social behaviors?
So Dolan and her colleague did what any scientist would do. They gave MDMA to octopuses. Octopuses are asocial creatures, and their last common ancestor with us lived more than 500 million years ago, which made them a good test subject for the question at hand. The researchers set up a simple test.
We have a large chamber, which is basically an aquarium tank, and then we divide it into 3 chambers. And on one side, we put a little overturned flower pot that's clear and plastic and has lots of holes in it. And underneath that overturned pot, we have a toy object. And on the other side, we have another overturned orchid pot, but this one has an octopus in it.
The researchers put an octopus in the middle chamber and watched it swim around for 30 minutes. They measured how much it interacted with one side of the chamber, the one with the other octopus, versus the chamber with the toy. Then they soaked the test octopus in a beaker of MDMA, put it back in the aquarium, and watched it for another 30 minutes. And what the researchers saw was weirdly similar to a human on MDMA.
Before they received MDMA, when they were interacting, they're very reserved. Even when they're spending time in the social side, they are sort of mashing their bodies up against the side wall and extending only one arm out to touch the flower pot and very tentatively touching with one arm. After MDMA, all of the animals spent significantly more time in the side that had the other octopus in it. And what's more is that the quality of their social interactions changed. They were much more loose in their body posturing, so they were allowing, several arms to touch the sides of the flower pot, sort of like hugging around the flower pot and exposing the bottom part of their body to the other octopus, which, the way that they were doing that was really suggesting that they were exploring rather than, any kind of aggressive posturing.
These observations indicate that serotonin began playing a role in animal social behavior more than 500 million years ago. Dolan says these findings could help scientists better understand social behavior, as well as give clues about possible treatments for human conditions like schizophrenia and PTSD. Meanwhile, we've learned, not surprisingly, given their anatomy, that octopuses are excellent huggers. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Annie Sneed.
If you despair that a mysterious plague of incurable political knuckleheadism has swept our country, turning previously progressive white working-class people into mindless Trump worshippers, check out this report, The Promise of a Progressive Populist Movement. It's from People's Action, a grassroots coalition that sent out volunteers to knock on more than 5,000 doors, have nearly 2,500 phone conversations, and visit scores of local events and churches in Trump country. Dozens of rural counties in 10 swing states that went for Trump in 2016. The volunteers simply had open conversations, asking folks in economically distressed rural communities what mattered to them politically. The most common initial response was, "No one's ever asked me before." While Trump voters are predominantly white, the working-class families visited by People's Action included Black, Latino, Native American, and other residents living in these rural areas. Practically none were worried about the inflammatory bugaboos that idolatrous Trumpsters cite. Hordes of invading aliens, mooching poor people, fake media. Rather, what most concerned them was being told by word and deed that they, America's hard-hit and hard-working families, don't matter. Far from converting to the narcissistic church of the Donald, these voters saw Trump as merely a handy blunt force club to whack a two-party system that no longer speaks to, much less for, them. This is Jim Hightower saying, and rather than embracing Trump's elitist ideology and corporate agenda, they told People's Action that they want populist reforms like health care for all, fair wages, free access to education, clean water, and a government uncorrupted by big money. To learn more and read the report, go to peoplesaction.org/the promise of a progressive populist movement.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
White woman, mistakenly believing she was groped, calls police on a black boy.
I'm children's book author Jane Yolen, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Recently, in a Brooklyn, New York deli, a 53-year-old white woman dialed 911 and reported to the police, quote, "I was just sexually assaulted by a child." The video taken inside the bodega shows something very different. What happened is this. A boy who is black and 9 years old, dressed in his school uniform and wearing a backpack, was inside the store. As he turned to talk to someone, his book bag brushed against the backside of the white woman, Teresa Klein, who then called the cops, causing the 9-year-old child and his friend to burst into tears, thinking he was about to go to jail. Ms. Klein, mitigating the situation a bit in a television interview later, said she was sorry. This incident is part of a much bigger story. Too often, police departments are used as instruments of oppression for biased callers. A longtime Flatbush resident who recorded the commotion outside the deli said, quote, "You think something like this only happens in the South, but it's all over the world." Yes, it is. It's a countrywide phenomenon and a countrywide disgrace.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because our children's freedom can't protect itself.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Tuesday, October 23rd, 2018. I'm Mark Boulanger. There is human intelligence, and then there is what is being called artificial intelligence, AI. AI is the use of computer technology to mimic human thinking. It consists of algorithms, which are processes or rules which tell the computer what to do when it addresses a problem. With the advent of very powerful computers and unlimited data sources, artificial intelligence seems poised to radically affect our workplaces. In this, the second of a 4-part series on artificial intelligence, I continue my discussion with Christina Colclough. Ms. Colclough is the Director of Platform and Agency Workers, Digitalization and Trade at Uni Global Union. Uni represents some 20 million workers in the skills and services sector worldwide. I asked Ms. Colclough about Uni's demand that the development of artificial intelligence serve people and planet.
We are, I would say, at a very important moment in history. I think we're at a situation now where technically, digitally, almost everything we can imagine is possible. Every solution, every extended articulation of artificial intelligence in the sense that we will live in a robotized world where people communicate more by digital means than anything else. That would be one scenario. Another scenario is autonomous weapons, warfare run by artificial intelligence and data and digital means. There's everything we can imagine, and even not even yet imagine is going to be possible. So our call here to make artificial intelligence serve people and planet is precisely to go in and say we need to shape and form this digital revolution. So let's put the demands that it must serve the interests of people and planet above anything else.
I have heard of a concept called management by algorithm. What is that, and what would it mean for workers?
This whole thing about management by algorithm. It's an exciting but also a little bit of a scary trend we're seeing now that, for example, algorithms, artificial intelligence is used increasingly in companies, but not only to control their production, their productivity and so forth, but in their human resource management. So you can, if you're applying for a job, it would be an autonomous system that sifts through all of the applicants, picks out people according to pre-coded words or patterns that the AI has been asked to identify. And then, the AI might recommend person A to be hired, or in reverse, who should be fired. Now, all of this is putting a whole new dimension into the employer-employee relations at work. When this algorithm, when these data sets are put into play between the employer and the employee and used maybe by the employers as an excuse to rationalize, to hire, fire, discipline people. Now, for us as workers, a pertinent issue here is what data is the algorithm relying on? Who is now being able, what data are they pulling from? Are you not going to get a job because of your health file? Are you not going to get a job because they can see on social media you're a trade union membership or a trade union member? Are you not going to get a job because the AI has been able to pull all sorts of information about you and has identified you as a risk? Now, if we don't know what data they're relying on or what information, then suddenly, again, there's this huge gap between the employers and the employees and this whole notion of decency and control. So management by algorithm is something we must be very aware of, tap into, and question, and have very strong demands to.
This has been the second in a series of 4 programs focused on artificial intelligence. And that's it. International labor news you can use. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. As several thousand Central American migrants cross Mexico toward the U.S. border, President Trump tweeted this weekend that, quote, people have to apply for asylum in Mexico first, and if they fail to do that, the U.S. will turn them away. While much of what Trump has said about the migrants is pure conjecture, American law isn't so subjective.
There's not a requirement that an individual apply at the very first or second country that they arrive in.
Bill Hing is a professor of law and migration studies at the University of San Francisco.
If somebody makes it to the United States who has gone through one or two countries, under United States asylum law, they are still eligible to apply.
Kevin Johnson, the dean of the University of California Davis School of Law, agrees.
There are exceptions. For example, if somebody has been firmly resettled in another country, but there's no obligation that they seek relief in another country or that they somehow try to establish resettlement in another country before coming to the United States.
But just because Trump misunderstands the law doesn't mean Mexico is necessarily much better. Mexican federal police were sent to the Guatemalan border last week before the caravan's arrival, but planning seemed to stop there.
Their priority has been a security focus, and we can see that that has not worked.
Madeline Penman is a researcher for Amnesty International in Mexico City and says few resources were in place to support so many people, including a large number of children.
The Mexican government has proved itself time and time again to be providing insufficient protection to these people.
Mexican authorities often fail to inform migrants they can apply for asylum in Mexico and then carry out illegal deportations. Penman said those shortcomings, though, don't let the U.S. off the hook.
Being one of the most powerful and resource-rich countries in the world, it simply cannot outsource its responsibilities to its southern neighbors. It needs to respect its own laws and respect international law.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 41 degrees Fahrenheit. I told you it was going to be in the low 40s rather than the mid. And looks like we are going to be much cooler than yesterday. We were bumping 80 when the sun finally warmed things up. It didn't last for too long. So I'd say for the most part we were around 75 yesterday. And we are expected to go to about 68, which means it'll be about 65 today. And the overnight low ostensibly is to remain in the mid 40s, but I think it'll be in the low 40s. That's how I have gauged the gauges. Winds currently are negligible 1 mile per hour out of the south-southwest. Will be shifting in just a couple of hours out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And that will be where the cooling off will originate. And will remain mostly cloudy throughout the day. Those winds will decrease out of the west-northwest to light and variable for overnight experiences, and will remain light and variable out of the west-northwest tomorrow, where we're expected to have a high of, like I said, about the same as today, which will be about 65. And so good. Now, we do have some weather coming in, and it may be bringing water, and we like that. So even though they're saying it's dry conditions, it's also a 20% chance of rain, and will remain 20% for till about Thursday, maybe Friday, and we may have rain on Halloween. All right. Ragweed pollen here in the area is considered moderate. The air quality index has inched into the good from moderate range, now at 43 parts per million. Not so good, but better. And the daytime UV index is at moderate at the register of 3. Pressure is falling at 29.9 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, so it's a rather high ceiling of clouds. And humidity currently is at 69%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 60 degrees and fair. Paris is 63 and sunny. Rome is 73 and sunny. Kiev is 46 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 58 and fair. Hong Kong is 73 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 61 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 64 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and mostly cloudy, and New York is 56 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy, and you still continue to have a small craft advisory with gusting winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour on waterways around the Big Apple. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Eric Bullard of Share Blue Media brings us this first offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Looks like Republican hopefuls who want to be like Trump are being rejected by voters because of their message of hate. Republican candidates are aggressively employing hate rhetoric this campaign season, and leading the way are ugly attacks on Muslims. But a new study shows the tactic doesn't work. Candidates who adopt an overtly Islamophobic message are losing at the ballot box. In its Running on Hate report released on Monday, Muslim Advocates, a national legal advocacy organization based in D.C., documented candidates who ran or are running in the 2017 and 2018 elections and produced Islamophobic campaigns as part of their political strategy. Of the nearly 80 anti-Muslim candidates identified, only about 11 to 14% were elected or are safely projected to win in November. And many of the candidates already lost races in 2017 and 2018. Virtually all of identified Islamophobic candidates are Republican. The state with the most anti-Muslim candidates is Texas with 8, followed by Virginia and Florida with 6 each. These candidates spread conspiracies about Muslims trying to take over the government or portray them as violent members of American society. Of course they do. It's all they have. Of course, in the age of Trump, a birther who pushed the Muslim travel ban just a week after taking office, Muslim bashing by Republican candidates is not a surprise. On Monday, Trump lied when he claimed Middle Easterners were sneaking across the U.S. border as part of a caravan of migrants making their way up through Central America. Why would any unknown, mysterious Middle Easterner go into the middle of a caravan of Latin American refugees and walk for thousands of miles over several months when all they have to do is go to Dubai, buy a first-class ticket, and fly to LaGuardia in just a few hours? Come on! I know. A friend said that I just don't get the nuance of conspiracies. And for good reason. It appears lots of Republicans have seen Trump's open bigotry as a green light to campaign on anti-Muslim bigotry. Out in California, this guy must be out, and Eric Bullard must be out on the East Coast, apparently, because California's out here. Indicted Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter has launched perhaps the most aggressively toxic anti-Muslim campaign in modern American history. Last week, Hunter's campaign released a letter claiming that if his Democratic opponent were elected to Congress, he would be a threat to national security because he would share military intelligence with Islamic terrorist organizations, except for the fact that his opponent has a security clearance and Duncan Hunter doesn't. They keep telling us that they're nationalists. They keep telling us that they're Nazis. Shouldn't we just believe them when they tell us who they are?
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Sharon Bernstein of Reuters brings us a little bit of good news here. A New Hampshire judge yesterday put on hold a law requiring some voters to present proof of residency when they register, saying it would lengthen lines at polling places and make it difficult for students, disabled voters, and others to cast ballots. Oh, you mean a mob of violent criminals? The temporary injunction against the Republican-backed law comes 2 weeks before U.S. congressional elections that will determine whether opposition Democrats or U.S. President Donald Trump's Republicans retain full control of the federal government's legislative branch. The measure, which was passed largely along party lines and went into effect just late last year, required those seeking to register within 30 days of an election to present documents proving that they live in the area where they intend to vote. Without such proof, they must agree to either send it in within 10 days or the state will seek to verify their domicile. The law does not require proof of address when voting. Where the law threatens to disenfranchise an individual's right to vote, the only viable remedy is to enjoin its enforcement. Presiding Justice Kenneth C. Brown wrote in his decision for the Hillsborough Superior Court Northern District in Manchester. He added that the registration form is too complicated for many people to understand. The legislation is the subject of a lawsuit filed by the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire and other groups, who said it would disenfranchise numerous groups, including students, the disabled, and homeless voters, and the measure will put on hold while the merits of the case are decided. Oh, wait a second. The League of Women Voters, obviously an outside agitator. New Hampshire Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter welcomed the ruling, and of course she's a Democrat. The law undermines our state reputation for holding free and fair elections, and it hurts our democracy. And Republicans all muttered under their breath, well, of course, how else can we win? All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But Networks Radio broadcasts on. It does. And we will visit with you tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Continue listening to Networks Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will indeed visit with you right here tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.